Welcome back to Old Guy REI. The deal looked good on paper. The numbers worked, and if you had asked me before we bought it, I would have told you it was a solid deal. But once we owned it, it didn't feel that way at all. And that gap between what looks good and what feels good, that's what I want to talk about. Because what I started to realize is this: what happens after you own it, after you own the property, that's where the numbers really change. Not on the spreadsheet, but in real life. And I'm not against cash flow. My wife and I still invest for it. But when we started, I had a very simple view of how this worked, or at least how I thought it was going to work. Rent comes in, expenses go out, what's left is profit. Simple. At least that's the model I had in my head. And on paper, that model looked pretty clean, but ownership isn't clean. What the numbers show you and what ownership feels like are not always the same thing. And that gap is where most of the stress comes from. One of the first things we ran into was expenses that they didn't show up clearly in the beginning. Not just big things, small things. And the small things stack up. You fix one thing, then something else comes up, then something else comes up. And it's not really spaced out the way that we hope it would be. It tends to hit all at once. Let me give you a real example from one of our properties. Our first deal was a triplex in St. Joseph, Missouri. On paper it looked fine, but what we didn't fully understand at the time was how it was set up. There was one furnace for all 3 units and one thermostat controlling the heat for the entire building, which means whoever had access to that thermostat was basically controlling the comfort for everybody. So now you've got 3 different tenants, 3 different preferences that are all tied to one system. And what do you think is going to happen? People get uncomfortable, people get frustrated, and that turns into complaints and turnover and more management than we expected. And it didn't all hit at once. It showed up over time in tenant issues, in coordination, and in things taking longer to stabilize than we expected. We owned that property for about 3 years, the way it was. But eventually we had to go back in and we added mini split systems to 2 of the units. And that cost us about $15,000. And once we did that, a lot of the issues settled down because tenants had control. A lot of the complaints stopped and most things became more stable. But that's the part you don't see on the front end. You don't see the time, the cost, or the adjustment that it takes to get a property to behave the way you thought it would in the beginning. And that was one of the first times I realized this is different than what I imagined or what I thought. And here's what doesn't show up well on a spreadsheet: how that feels. When things start stacking up, we had a stretch where it felt like everything hit all at one time. One property needed a repair we didn't expect. Another had an issue with a tenant. And at the same time, we had a vacancy. On paper, each one of those is manageable. But when they hit together, that's when it really feels different. Because now it's not just money, it's your time, your attention, a lot of energy. And that's the part I didn't fully understand at the time. And the spreadsheet usually shows clean numbers. Ownership isn't clean. It can be messy at times. Another thing I fully didn't understand in the beginning was timing. Rent's supposed to come in on a schedule, but expenses don't. And you can go a couple of months where everything is running fine and feels fine. Then one month hits and two or three things happen and or break at the same time. And on paper the deal still works. But in real life, that month feels pretty heavy. That's when I started to understand cash flow isn't just math, it's timing. Then there's vacancy. And vacancy isn't just missing rent, it's everything that comes with it. A turnover, for example, cleaning, repairs, turnover time. And during that time, expenses don't stop. And for us, buying out of state, that added another layer, like slower response times, more coordination, felt like we had less control. Again, not impossible. We're still doing it, but it's heavier than it looks when you're just analyzing a deal. I think the biggest gap for me was expectation. I expected the property to perform in the beginning. I didn't expect how often it would need attention. That gap, that's where the frustration starts. Because a deal can look good and still feel stressful to own. That doesn't mean real estate doesn't work, because we still believe in it. But it does mean you need to understand how it behaves in real life. That's why I keep coming back to preparation. Not just asking, does this deal cash flow? But asking, what happens when it doesn't? What happens when things don't go perfectly? Because at some point they won't. And if your deal only works when things are running perfectly, that's not a strong deal. That's a pretty fragile deal. And if you can understand that, you'll be in a much better place than we were. If you've owned rentals, what surprised you the most? And I know sometimes this might feel like I'm trying to talk people out of investing in real estate or rental properties, but that's the last thing I would ever do. I'm trying to help people understand, and a lot of you are going to do much better than we did. That's the whole purpose of this channel, is to share our experiences, our mistakes, our lessons learned, so that you can avoid a lot of them. And that'll make your journey a lot quicker than ours has been, and a lot less stressful. That's one of the reasons that, I've mentioned in other videos that I have a rental reality checklist. It's free to download. The link's in the description. And hopefully that will be helpful. I hope if you download it that you will get in touch with me and let me know if there are ways that you think I could make it better. Because that's my goal, to put one document together that will answer as many questions as possible. And if you need to go beyond that, I also offer what I would call a clarity call. It's a 30-minute call. It's a paid call, but we can schedule some time. We can talk about whether this is your first property or your second property. I'm a general contractor. If you're doing a remodeling project, we can use the time for that. However, it's most useful for you. So check out the links in the description, and please, if you would, hit the like button and a subscribe button And I'll be continuing this series of videos. I'll put a link to the playlist in case you missed the first few videos that started this whole thing. So I appreciate you watching. We'll see you on the next one.